and you are as powerful as you believe you are. And you are not your circumstances. You are not your pain. You are not the things that have happened to you. You are bigger. You have been placed on this earth for a reason. And going through whatever you have gone through in this life is going to put you in a space where you can help and heal other people.
Welcome to the One Girl Revolution podcast. We have another great show for you today. We've had a bunch of survivors on the podcast lately, and that's been on purpose. Every single woman has a story to tell, and when we tell our stories, it gives other people the permission and oftentimes the courage to tell their stories. So I love survivor stories, and I want to find more opportunities to highlight them. If you're new here, please make sure that you're subscribed to the One Girl Revolution podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at One Girl Revo, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can find all of our podcast episodes, documentaries, and more at onegirlrevolution.com. That's the number onegirlrevolution.com. On this week's episode of the One Girl Revolution podcast, I welcome Shannon Miller-Cox, a survivor herself and founder of Journey of Hope. Journey of Hope is a nonprofit that supports women and girls that are experiencing homelessness, struggling with addiction, formerly incarcerated or just got out of the system, survivors of sexual abuse and trauma, survivors of human trafficking, and so many others. Shannon uses her own personal experience and her experience in law enforcement to build community and support around these women and girls and help them find hope, healing, and purpose. Shannon is an incredible woman, and I'm so thrilled to have her on the podcast today to share her story and her work. Here's my conversation with Shannon. Shannon, welcome to the One Girl Revolution podcast.
Thank you, Kate. I'm excited to be here.
I'm so excited to have you on to talk about the great work that you're doing. But before we get into that, I always ask, who is a One Girl Revolution in your life? Who's a woman or girl that's inspired you?
I get to work with amazing, inspiring, resilient women coming off the street and fleeing domestic violence and fleeing trafficking. And I get to see that inner resiliency, that inner fire to survive and then become self-sufficient, self-reliant, and then to serve others and to serve other victims. And so I get the unique experience of seeing a million powerful, resilient warriors survive and thrive and become warriors for other women. And then I'm raising a warrior in my home. She is going to be 16 in July, and she is a rage against the machine, powerful, fiery, resilient young girl. And it's a privilege to be her mother. And so I get to see it everywhere.
I think it's so important for us just to recognize the women and girls in our own lives. Like you talked about your daughter. Sometimes we don't often take these moments to just sit and be present and see the One Girl Revolutions in our daily lives, our mothers, our sisters, our friends, or even recognize them in that way. I think that life gets so busy that, you blink and then you have a 16-year-old, but just seeing the evolution of a woman is so important.
Amen. And celebrating them, celebrating all of those little shero moments where they stand up against, racism in middle school and stand up for their friends that are being bullied and stand up for the little girl that's being sexually harassed and stand up against mountainous issues that you watch them learn how to navigate and become powerful in their own right. It's a brilliant, beautiful thing.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about your life because you've evolved into this incredible woman, this incredible revolution. So I'd love to just rewind. And if you wouldn't mind telling a little bit about your story and just where you come from and who you are and just kind of a little bit about your upbringing.
Sure. I grew up in small town, rural Virginia. Beautiful family, great parents, wonderful siblings, very privileged life. My dad was a dentist, so we didn't want for anything. But I was being molested as a child for most of my childhood, starting at age 3 until I think about 10 or 11. And then I somehow stored that somewhere in the back of my mind, and became a very resilient child. But then at Brigham Young University was raped, and it seemed like all of the trauma of my childhood came full force, and just swallowed me for probably a few years. And so I became a law enforcement officer because I wanted the abuse to stop. And I thought if I put a badge and a gun on my hip, that men would stop abusing me. And what I found were thousands and thousands of people suffering from trauma, using addiction to self-medicate, to get numb. And you can't lock up and heal trauma in jails and prisons. It's just the wrong space to heal people. We're not trauma informed and responsive in those spaces. We try to be. We've tried to create trauma informed and responsive spaces in incarceration spaces. It's just not the right space to heal spirits. You take everything away from someone. You take their home and their children and their jobs and their securities away from them, and then you try to do healing work with them in spaces that aren't safe, emotionally or physically safe. And it's just not the right place to heal the spirit. And so 20 years in law enforcement, trying to change the system from the inside. One little feminist in Utah, they were like, sit down and shut up. Stop talking about the social issues here. Stop talking about the amount of sexual abuse here. Stop talking. So I wasn't, you either loved me or you hated me as a police officer, because I was just like this force, this feminist force, really, inside of a very patriarchal system. So we did as much as we could inside, but 20 years in law enforcement, I retired and started Journey of Hope. And we've helped thousands and thousands of women and youth and girls and LGBTQIA walk out of incarceration settings and heal their brains and bodies and make a livable wage and get their children back and buy homes and go to college. And, you know, what I tell women now when I walk into prisons is, this isn't the end. This is the beginning. You are not your mistakes. God loves you and we love you, and we're waiting for you to walk out, and we're going to walk with you, and we're going to break down barriers for you, and we're going to open every door we can for you, because you're worth it. You're worth it. God didn't make you to put you in this space for you to die here. This is the beginning if you choose it. This is the beginning of a new life. So let's get your butterfly wings and teach you how to fly, because you're a caterpillar and you think you're going to die in this place, but you're not. And so it's about building hope and bridges, and seeing women as resilient survivors and helping them paint a different picture of the life that they've lived and the mistakes that they've made, and that they can overcome, that we all can overcome our mistakes, that we all can overcome the barriers that we face in our life, no matter where we are, that we can be forgiven and we can move past it. And, you know, like, we're not the mistakes that we've made in our lives. We're more than a rap sheet. We're more than, you know, that scarlet letter F that people want to stamp on our foreheads. So yeah, that's the story, right? It's a story of redemption. It's beautiful. And so, you know, we've become victim advocates, for women that can't call police. When you're addicted and you're being abused and you're mentally ill and you're on the streets and you're fleeing violence, you don't feel like you can call the police if you have a warrant, and you're being trafficked and you're being abused. But you can call us, and we'll help get you out, and we'll get you safe, and we'll help you resolve your issues with the court and the Board of Pardons and Parole. And we will stand with you in those spaces, in the darkness. So we become an avenue for victim advocacy where there is not an avenue, right? You know, normally.
Yeah. Well, people that listen to this podcast know that we've done a lot on incarceration, especially because women are the fastest growing population within jail and prison. So many of them come from similar backgrounds to you, that they're survivors of abuse, assault. I mean, you just listen to their stories. And I actually, a couple of years ago, had the opportunity to go into Cook County Jail And we produced this short documentary called The Girl Inside, and just talking to these women about what their hopes and dreams were when they were little girls, and no one told them that they mattered. And I'm sure that that's what you hear every single day from women, that no one actually just looked them in the eye and saw them as a human being, as a person. And I think that's part of the problem in our culture, is we don't see one another. We just kind of, especially in the incarceration system, it's just, put them away and then deal with it later. And then they get out, and then there's recidivism. I mean, there's so many different things that we could dig into, but I want to ask you, actually, when you were in law enforcement as a survivor yourself, was that difficult when you were going through, I'm sure in the situation that you are now, you're able to actually help women in so many different ways. But I imagine that there were moments where you probably felt helpless as a law enforcement officer, that you were able to help these women only so far. But what was that experience like, being a survivor yourself and working with or running into all these different scenarios that were very similar to your own?
Initially, it was very triggering because I wasn't being taught trauma-informed and trauma-responsive practices. It wasn't until I became a supervisor and started creating trauma-informed and trauma-responsive programs for women and girls with Nanon Tally and JJS, and started really interrupting that sexual assault to prison pipeline and finding alternatives to incarceration for women as a law enforcement administrator, and hiring staff that wanted to be trauma informed and trauma responsive with women, and interrupting that pipeline and finding teaching them to find alternatives to incarceration, working with victim advocates in the community, finding safe, emotionally and physically safe spaces for our women that were coming out of incarceration settings so they didn't have to go back to their abuser, really looking at alternatives to incarceration settings for mostly nonviolent women. Most of the women we put in prison are poor, and they don't have access to jump from expensive inpatient to expensive inpatient the way, people with private therapy options do, and have, private wealth have the opportunity to do. If you have private wealth, you can stay out of prison. But if you're poor and you get kicked out of the one, Medicaid funded inpatient program in Weber County, you're going to prison to get treatment. 60% of the women in Utah in our prison are from one county, and they have 8 inpatient beds for the second largest criminal justice population, and 8 Medicaid funded inpatient beds for the second largest criminal justice population. So those women, mostly women of color, go to prison because they don't have enough Medicaid funded inpatient beds. So basically we're filling our prison with poor women of color, which is what we do nationally, right?
Right.
And that's not a space where you heal trauma. Almost all of these women have sexual assault histories, have child abuse histories, have neglect histories, have food insecurity histories, come from intergenerational poverty. They have an ACE score of 5 and above, adverse childhood experiences where there were no trauma-informed interventions to heal their brains and limbic systems. They started self-medicating with drugs and alcohol. There were dangerous men in those spaces. They were exploited in those spaces. And then we throw them into our jails and prisons to get treatment. That's not the right place. And it costs twice as much to do treatment in an incarceration setting. So it's the wrong place. It's twice as expensive. It doesn't make economic sense. It doesn't make humanitarian sense. It's not trauma informed or trauma responsive. It's not evidence based. So we can change all this. We can upend all of this. There are a couple issues in Utah, though, that we have to deal with in order to really impact what's happening in Utah. There are a couple stats, violent crime stats, that are above the national average in Utah. We are above the national average in sexual assault of our children, and we're above the national average in domestic violence homicide. 1 in every 3 homes in Utah is experiencing domestic violence, and 1/3 of the men in our prison are there for pedophilic acts, which is unheard of in the United States, and they were all abused as children. Right. And we know that children that get therapy don't become adult offenders. So we can upend these statistics by becoming a trauma-informed, trauma-responsive state that sees harmed children, allows them to heal, and doesn't perpetuate these cycles of sexual and physical violence so that they don't then become self-medicating and we don't fill our prisons with victims and perpetrators in Utah. But in Utah, we don't like to talk about the fact that we have this culture that perpetuates this undercurrent of violence that we don't want to talk about. We don't want to talk about domestic violence. We don't want to talk about domestic violence homicide. We don't want to talk about sexual assault here. And so because we don't talk about those things, it stays in the darkness, doesn't come to light. And then we're above the national average in opiate overdose death, suicide death, and over incarceration of people with addictions, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They just broke ribbon yesterday on a new multi-million-dollar, almost billion-dollar prison.
Wow.
That we can incarcerate more addicted people when it's twice as expensive to put them in prison. So, I mean, the machine just keeps doing what it was built to do.
Check out One Girl Revolution's YouTube channel and hit subscribe for more podcast episodes, short documentaries, and other video content. The Girl Inside features the powerful story of a professor who teaches a life-changing storytelling class to incarcerated women at Cook County Jail. The second documentary from One Girl Revolution is coming soon, so make sure that you're the first to know by subscribing to One Girl Revolution on YouTube. Yeah, well, you hit on something that I think is really important for everybody who's listening to the podcast is there's so many things in the culture that we don't want to talk about, right? And I think about my parents' life years and years ago when they grew up. It was like, don't talk about it. Like anything bad that happens, don't talk about it. Oh, that person, abuse situations, trauma, all types of things. And thankfully, I feel like we're shifting where people are starting to talk about mental health in a new way. Organizations and individuals like yourself are talking about the issues, as difficult as it is. That's why it's so important. That's why this podcast even exists, for women and girls to share sometimes the difficult things, sometimes the terrible things, the traumas that they've gone through, but to also show the resilience and then to talk about the real issues, because we want to encourage people to do something, to talk about their stories, to share their stories. And what I see from so many of the women that I've gotten to know who have either worked in the incarceration system or were incarcerated themselves, the second they started talking about their traumas or able to just share their story, it's opened up this journey for healing, this start, this little spark that started things off. And so I just am so blown away by what you're doing. And I didn't know all of those stats about Utah. And so that's something that I'm going to be keeping an eye on. And it's important for us to be talking about. Yeah, it's so important.
Yeah. It's got to come from the darkness into the light. You can't resolve an issue unless you're willing to bring it from the darkness into the light. And as soon as we're willing as a state to bring it from the darkness into the light, we can heal everybody. We can heal the offender and the victims because they start as victims. And that's one thing people just want to throw offenders away, but they started off as victims and they're coming back into our communities and they're attached to families and children. And we don't want them to have any more victims. And so if we want to make them whole, so that our community can be safer, the way we do that is by allowing them to heal too.
Well, and I think what you're doing with women, I think that women have such a power, more power than we even recognize most days. We have the power to not only heal ourselves, but heal generations and generations to come, right? Our children, our children's children. And I had Dr. Emily Salisbury from Utah actually on the podcast a couple months ago, and she was kind of breaking down the high rates of incarceration with women and just talking about the multifacets. Like you said, there's usually abuse in the background in some way, whether it was child abuse or domestic violence. There's some other motivating factor that leads them to jail or prison, or they're trying to feed their kids. There's all these different facets. And so it's important for us to break it down. And no story is the same. No story of a survivor is the same. Everybody heals in different ways, but that's why it's so important to be having the conversations. And that's why it's so critical, the work that you're doing with Journey of Hope. So I want to ask you mentioned about how you started it, but was there a spark moment where you were just like, all right, this is what I need to do. This is how I'm going to start?
Yes. I got in trouble for working on housing for women coming out of prison as, a captain level. And they were like, Shannon, you are working so above your pay grade. You are so out of line. You are not in your chain of command anymore. Like, who the hell do you think you are? This is like governor level stuff. You are so far down in the chain. You should not even be communicating with this level of people. We were going to turn motels that were, trafficking women. We were going to get all of them seized and purchased by the city. We were going to turn them into vouchered programs for women coming out of prison. We were going to put agents and social workers in there and turn them into vouchered programs. And they were like, you have lost your mind and you don't know who you are. You are a captain level supervisor with adult probation and parole. They plucked me out of the program that I had created, gender responsive trauma informed program, $500,000 building donated by the state, 100 and something agents statewide, trauma informed gender responsive agents statewide, FOSSI program implementation, female offender success initiative statewide, plucked me out and threw me into a sex offender halfway house program to teach me a lesson as a survivor of sexual violence. And I learned very quickly and very humbly that I did not own any of the work that I had done for them, and that I could be harmed by an agency that I loved and would have done anything for. So I worked with hundreds of sex offenders, Axis 1 pedophiles, men that had over 600 victims from a two-year mission in Texas that were on for Class A misdemeanors. And every day I went home and cried and begged them to move me because I was having dreams of executing these guys. I'm a range master, and I was having dreams of laying on a building and sniping them off. Like, I was like, I'm going to end up killing these guys. Like, I knew I wasn't, but I was like, really, my PTSD was through the roof. And I just thought, wow, all this work I did to help the Department of Corrections become this beautiful space for harmed women. And in the end, they wanted to harm me. And I knew in that moment that I couldn't stay any longer. It didn't matter if the chiefs changed and I was beloved again. And that happened, right? So everyone comes out of the doghouse eventually, and the chiefs change, and the guys, they all change at the top. And then, let's get Shannon out of the sex offender halfway house. She doesn't need to be there anymore. And they put me somewhere where I could, be happy and successful and not around sex offenders all day long. And they, and a new administrator came in and said, Shannon, you've done all this amazing work. Let me move you up to the executive office. We'll create a position for you. We're going to do this, this, and this. And I said, no, I'm retiring at 20 years. You can't hurt me anymore. And he was like, no, that'll never happen again. I said, you'll be gone in a year or two. And the next guy will come in, and he may or may not like my feminist opinions and my progressive views about how to handle women. And, someone that'll, shut me down and throw me into a sex offender halfway house program.
Right.
Could come in and, harm me again. I'm out after 20 years of service. I'm out. So.
Well, I appreciate your rebellion. And I think that we need more moments like that. And sometimes we have to go through something really traumatic to end up where we're supposed to be, and not to sugarcoat it, not to make light of what you went through, that trauma that you went through in those 6 months. But you might not be doing what you're doing right now. Might not have left to start Journey of Hope. So I want to hear about Journey of Hope. I can obviously look at the website. People that are listening, I'll encourage them to look at the website to support your work. And I'm going to ask you later on what people can do to support you and everything that you're doing. But What is Journey of Hope? And tell me more about what you guys do.
So we walk women out of jails, prisons, off the street, out of fleeing violence, domestic violence, and trafficking, girls that have been sexually exploited and trafficked, and we walk with them for as long as they need us. We're limitless. We follow all of the gender responsive evidence-based practices. We're trauma-informed and responsive. We're client and victim-centered. They drive the plan. We don't drive the plan. We use an evidence-based risk needs assessment. We are holistic in the way we look at the case management plan. She gets to decide where we start. She's empowered the complete way through to drive her own plan. We don't tell her what she needs to do. We're strength-based. We see the glass is half full, not half empty. We see that she's been resilient in different spaces and how she can use those resiliency factors to overcome the barriers in her life. We're just there to assist her and to help her navigate resources and help build her up and be her advocate in every space possible. And we're with mentally ill women probably for the rest of their lives. And for women that are really resilient and become self-reliant, we encourage them to come join us, come work for Journey of Hope, or become a peer leader, become a volunteer mentor to walk other women out of prisons and jails. Most of our staff are previously incarcerated and survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault and human trafficking. Our current acting executive director is a survivor of human trafficking and addiction and homelessness and suicide attempts and incarceration. And several of our case managers have been previously incarcerated women and are survivors of horrific abuse. And we just believe that there's power in lived experience. And I'm the only previous law enforcement officer, but obviously I have, huge empathy and a love for these women. And I believe that, I could have been there with them had I not had the white privilege, the middle class privilege, the law enforcement privilege, that if somebody had shot me up with dope and turned me out, that I could have very easily ended up in the spaces and the incarceration spaces that they ended up in. So that because of that privilege and my survival, that it's my job, it's my duty, it's my purpose on this earth to pay it forward and to walk with women wherever they are and to find pathways for women out of dark, dangerous spaces.
I remember this moment that I had at Cook County Jail and sitting there with all these women and just thinking how we're all one step away from jail. I was one step away from Cook County, right? Like even if you had different friends growing up or you dated a different guy or whatever the thing is, like all the different things like throughout my life kind of started like going through my head, and I was thinking about all the different things. And so I'm sure you have experiences like that all the time, and that's why it's so important for us to be talking about this. Maybe people that are listening don't have experience with incarceration. Maybe they don't know anybody who's ever been in jail or prison, but there's so much to be done. And it really comes down to the humanity, seeing these people as individuals. Again, no story is the same. And you're working with so many people. And I mentioned it earlier that, women have this tremendous power to change not only the trajectory of their lives, but the lives of their children and their children's children. And so for you working with more than 1,000 women so far, I can only imagine the impact on the world that that's going to have. And again, identifying survivors and people who have experienced being incarcerated and being able to come out and help other people. I think that sometimes we go through experiences so that we can help other people and help other people see their purpose and find their purpose. And that's what you've created. That's what you're creating through Journey of Hope.
Yeah, we have 17% recidivism in our mentoring program, walking women out of prison. And what I tell people, because we have the state rate is like close to 70%. It's one of the highest in the United States, is that it's really simple. It's really, really simple. When women feel emotionally and physically safe, when they have access to resources, when they can make a livable wage, we are powerfully resilient. When we can heal our brains and our limbic systems and sleep at night in a safe space where no one can harm us, and we have access to resources and a livable wage, we can accomplish anything. We don't want to suffer. We don't want to see our children suffer. So just giving women access, a safe place to walk out to, vocational training, employment training, livable wage opportunities, a pathway, an access point. We will do the work. We will go to the training. We will show up. Just allow us the opportunity. It is so simple. Create the relationship so that there is an emotional and physical safety. And we do that for 3 to 6 months before somebody walks out of prison. We create the relationship. They know that we're here to stay. They know that we care. They know that we're going to build them up, not tear them down to build them up. We're going to build them up. We see the classes half full. We're ready to rock and roll with them. And we're going to make sure that every door is opened, that every opportunity is laid out in front of them. They're not going to be worried about whether they have an ID or not, whether they have that bus money or not, whether they have a safe place to sleep at night. It's all going to be in place. So then they just get to choose to make the next right choice. And most women do that. Most women do that. The 17% that have gone back are really mentally ill women, right? 17% recidivism in 8 years isn't bad.
Not bad at all. And I'm sure that you keep the relationship with them and continue to work
forever.
Because we all are works in progress, right? Like we
Amen.
all have our moments. And so you might take a step back, but I think just having people that believe in you and walk with you. And so you're always there for everyone.
What did you learn from it? Even when I was in law enforcement, we were taking women back to prison, there are officers that would take people back to prison and play bad boys and just be jerks to people on the way back to prison. But I would teach our staff to have thoughtful conversations. What did we miss this time? What can we help you with next time? What do your children need while you're gone? Can I help? How can I be more helpful the next time you get out? What are the warning signs? What should I be looking for next time to know that you're relapsing, that you're struggling, that you're not telling me? And when you have those thoughtful conversations and people know you care, they look at the relationship differently. It's not so adversarial. So then the slippery slope isn't so steep, right? Then they don't go, oh, I can't talk to my PO. I can't tell them I'm using. Then it's like, oh, I can tell Shannon I relapsed because she's going to get me into a program. She's not going to take me right back to prison, right? Whereas Joe Schmo that plays bad boys on the way back to the prison and talks to you like you're a piece of crap, I can't tell him that I've relapsed. He's scary, right? So it's really building that relationship, having that relationship, no matter what the setting. And so, I mean, even the agents that have those powerful relationships, teaching the agents to have those amazing healing relationships lowers recidivism rates. Because if I can tell you I've relapsed, you can help me get into a program before I commit a new crime.
It's just so powerful to be thinking about, Shannon. We all need that community, right? We all need one person that just listens to us. And so I'm thinking about so many different situations, how we can all be better, that we can listen to somebody or be that safe space where someone can share, hey, I'm really struggling with alcohol, or hey, I did this thing, and not judging that person, but actually helping them feel comfortable to talk about it, and then helping them get the support that they need, which I'm so blown away by you. And I'm so blown away by everything that you're doing. And just your example is kind of blowing my mind and challenging me to think about things in a different way. But Shannon, I want to ask you, because you're working with so many different women, and, I'm sure you have a million stories and you could write many, many books about all the different things. And hopefully you do at some point, but
I'm working on one.
Awesome. And I'll have you on again whenever your book is done, and we'll be sure to promote it. But could you share a couple of stories about the people that you've worked with, maybe how you got connected with them, and just kind of a little bit about their journey with Journey of Hope, just so people can get a snapshot of some of the people that you've worked with.
I have permission to share a couple stories. I always get permission because when women hear me talk, I don't want them to hear their story and then not have had permission to tell their story, even without their names, because I believe that everyone's story is theirs to tell. And before I learned this lesson, I was telling people stories, but not attached to their names, and it was hurting them. And they were like, that's my story. And I was like, oh, I didn't use your name. And they're like, but it's my story. And I was like, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. So I have permission to tell these stories. I'll say that first. So I met one of the women that works with me by my side in Journey of Hope. And we're egalitarian. We're a worker, self-directed nonprofit now. That's also another lesson I had to learn with my white privilege and my building a hierarchy as a nonprofit. I didn't realize I was oppressing women of color and returning citizens. I thought I was empowering them by hiring them, but I was making $8 an hour more than them. And I was telling returning citizens and women of color what to do. And it was the wrong thing to do. And I didn't realize that I'd created a hierarchy and that I was doing that. But so another lesson for another day to talk about, but we should, we really need to create equitable spaces for harmed women and women of color, for anyone that comes from harmed spaces and places, communities that have been harmed by white people. White people need to create equitable spaces for people to work in. And so we're now egalitarian, equal pay to start. Everyone makes the same, equal power. We all make the same, we all vote on decisions. No one tells anybody what to do. We all get a vote in everything we do. We have a vote on the board. And so I work next to her, and she's as powerful, more powerful than I'll ever be because of how resilient she is. And the women trust her more because she's been where they've been. But I met her in prison when we started the mentoring program 8 years ago, when I retired from corrections. And I met her, and I was very, very humbled because she was sitting in prison, and she said, I don't know what these women are complaining about. This is the safest I've ever felt in my life. I've been on the streets since I was 12 years old. I left my home because my home was more dangerous than the streets. And my parents were addicted, and there were dangerous people coming in and out of that house. And I was tired of being abused. So she learned how to become a resilient entrepreneur on the streets at that time. And as a 12-year-old, she graduated on time with her class. She's brilliant. Had she had a safe home, she would have had 1 million academic scholarship opportunities. In fact, I think she did have a couple scholarship opportunities, but she was homeless and couldn't utilize those. So she lived on the streets for years, hustling, and that became her life. And by the time she was arrested for possession, she asked the judge to send her to prison because she had been arrested several times and just released, and ended up in the same dangerous settings, around the same dangerous people, abused by the same dangerous gangs and men. And so she said, Your Honor, please send me to prison. I want to go to school. I want to be safe. I want the opportunity to go to a program. And I heard there's good programs at the prison. Please send me to prison. In the jail, there are no programs. There is no education, and they'll just release me. And I'll go back to homelessness and go back to what I know, survival. And so he sent her to prison, and she completed an inpatient therapeutic community. She became a tier lead there. She worked a job. And so when I met her, she said, this is amazing. She told me that prison was like the Hilton to her, what she imagined the Hilton was like. She said, I feel safe. I have a bed to sleep on. I get to go to school. I get to work a job, and nobody hurts me at night. And I remember leaving there thinking, wow, yeah, never felt so humbled by somebody in the system. Most people talk about jail and prison and loss and leaving their children and having everything taken away and what an awful place it is, and women being abused by each other and by the officers. And I never heard somebody describe it as the safest place they'd ever been, and like the Hilton, like they imagined the Hilton would be. And it was a very humbling experience. And she successfully completed the mentoring program, successfully completed parole, was part of a housing program that we created in an apartment complex above where we had our office, started volunteering for us, started mentoring other women for us, and eventually started working for us at Journey of Hope, and has a higher credit score than me and qualified for like a $400,000 house before COVID, and the market went crazy. But I mean, she's just amazing. And she moved her parents out of a motel where there was black mold, and her dad was pulling himself on the ground because his legs don't work. I mean, she moved her parents into a home, and we became their case managers, and she got her son sober. And like, you know, when a mom gets sober, she gets the whole family healthy. Like,
Right.
She's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
She's brilliant and amazing and a gift to this world. And her story is amazing. But she's one of 3,500 resilient, amazing women that we've worked with in 8 years.
Watch In Tandem, the new short documentary by One Girl Revolution, which highlights the incredible story of Caitlin Cullen and her restaurant in Milwaukee, The Tandem. The Tandem is more than a restaurant. It's a family, a community that at its height was a bustling restaurant serving food and supporting every single person who walked through its doors in one way or another. If someone needed a job, you got it. Having a bad day and needing a smile or a laugh, The Tandem's got you. Having a rough time and need support, The Tandem isn't just a restaurant, it's your family. They got you. When COVID hit in March 2020, The Tandem stepped up to serve the community in a new way. They stopped selling food to customers and started solely feeding people in need. The Tandem community ended up feeding over 115,000 people during the first year of the pandemic. Absolutely incredible. Get to know Caitlin and the Tandem story in One Girl Revolution's new short documentary, In Tandem. Watch In Tandem today at onegirlrevolution.com or on YouTube. Please watch and share this inspiring story. Yeah, it's so important, the work that you're doing, and particularly not even lifting women up, but just giving women a space to authentically be themselves, authentically share their stories, talk about their hopes and dreams, and then chase those. So, you know, your work is so critical. And I think that there are little elements of things that you're doing that we can do no matter where we live. Obviously, we can support your work in Utah, but we all have that power to look around and stand up too. Sometimes we have these moments, I think, especially women, where we think, oh, I'm not worthy. I can't do that. I couldn't do that. And we can. And then we can have the power to change other people's lives and you know, transform the lives of those around us, but also the culture, the world, and the future.
Amen.
So, Shannon, I'm curious if you could get to the root, the very root. You know, there's always a driving force behind what we do every single day, day in and day out. Maybe your daughter some days is your driving force, but if you could get to the very root of why you do what you do, why you do Journey of Hope every single day, because I'm sure there are some days where it's really difficult, and there are days where you probably still come home and cry or come home and feel defeated. You're like, why am I doing this? Or somebody goes back into jail or prison. You're like, why do I keep putting myself out there? We all have these moments of doubt, or moments where we kind of challenge what we are doing and think like, maybe I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. But if you could get to the very root of why you do what you do with Journey of Hope, what would you say that root is?
The root is that I know that you can heal. The brain can heal, and the limbic system can heal, and you can have a completely different life. And because I have been healed and my brain got to heal, my limbic system got to heal, I have a responsibility to help bring that gift to others and to spread that message of healing from trauma, that you don't have to die 25 years early because you were abused as a child. Everyone deserves to know that their brain can heal from trauma, that it's actually a brain injury, that it's not a disorder for the rest of your life, that there are thousands of psychiatrists across the world trying to get it changed in the DSM from a disorder to a brain injury that can heal. Everyone needs to know that the things that happened to them as a child are not their fault, that it rewired their brain for dishealth and dysfunction, that their body is aging because of it. There are bad hormones surging through your body. They're aging your heart and your liver and your body. But you can stop all of that. You can stop all of it. You can heal your brain. You can calm your limbic system. And you can change your life. And that, because it's happened for me, because I can feel God's love for me. And I can feel it for every single woman that I meet. I know that I'm supposed to share that message with everybody. We can heal. We can heal everyone, not just the rich people, not just the people that can afford yoga, not just the people that can afford $250 an hour for therapy. Everybody can heal. And when they get to heal, they're not angry anymore. They stop hurting each other. They stop killing each other. We stop warring with one another. Right? Our children stop being harmed. We stop worrying about our children going to school. We stop the violence in our communities and in countries and in our world. So it starts in our homes and in our states, but then it spreads from there. We can heal. And because I felt it and I know I have a responsibility to share that with everyone that can hear my voice.
Shannon, are there some resources that have helped you? And maybe there's something that you think of later that I can put in the show notes, but I think a lot of people that maybe have gone through something difficult or are going through something difficult or want to find that healing that you're talking about, a lot of times we don't know where to start. Are there any resources that come to mind that helped you or have helped the other women that you work with?
Yeah, one of the best books I ever read was Vanderkolk's The Body Keeps the Score. And he goes through the whole history of the Vietnam War and how they created post-traumatic stress disorder diagnosis. And then they realized there were all these children that had the same symptoms. Oh my gosh, it's not just from war. It's something that happens in the brain from trauma. Oh my gosh, there's all these people with trauma. And how, it's progressed and now it's really a brain injury that can heal. And then the whole back of the book is like, you can heal using music therapy and EMDR and thought field therapy and neural feedback and dance therapy and meditation and guided meditation, there are a million modalities that calm the brain and start to heal the limbic system. And there are a million free modalities on the internet, right? With YouTube, you can learn emotional freedom technique for free by tapping into your limbic system and calming your limbic system. They're teaching children to tap in schools. They're teaching guided meditation in schools to calm children's limbic systems so that they can learn better, right? Because when you're limbic, when you are in fight, flight, and freeze as a child because you're experiencing trauma, your brain activity is all in the back of your brain. You learn information up here, but if the blood flow isn't up there, you can't learn new information. So kids in schools with trauma look like they have ADD and ADHD, but if we're not asking the right questions, we're not getting to the root of the trauma. But if you just assume all the children in schools have trauma, just assume it, you can calm everyone's brain with guided meditation, transcendental meditation. They're doing all kinds of mindfulness work in schools, mindfulness rooms for kids that are being disruptive because they don't just assume anymore that they have ADD or ADHD. Maybe they have some trauma going on. How do you calm the brain, calm the limbic system so a child can be successful in a classroom? So all the stuff, right? Trauma-informed spaces in our education system, trauma-informed spaces where harmed children show up. We need trauma-informed spaces everywhere, right? Pediatrics, maternal health care, trauma-informed. We need a trauma-informed world.
I love it. Well, I wrote down a bunch of notes as you were talking, and I'm sure that a lot of parents who are listening are thinking about all the different ways that they're going to be like calming their kids down and creating these spaces, because it's so important for us. And to know that there are so many free resources out there. You don't have to have a ton of money to go and do any of these things, especially in the age of the internet. There are so many free resources. So, where do you go from here, Shannon? I know you mentioned that you're writing the book, but where do you and Journey of Hope go from here? What are some things that you're working on? I'm sure you're going to continue to grow and do more work with more people and just continue to grow your amazing network. But where do you go from here?
Yeah, Journey of Hope is growing. We're hiring staff. We're doing some job development, getting ready to do some job development work. With a grant, we hope to go statewide so that any harmed woman, girl, LGBTQI person in Utah has access to gender responsive, trauma informed services, no matter whether they're coming out of homelessness, jail, prison, or fleeing violence, and then possibly expand to other states. We know that there is a huge issue with sexual exploitation in Nevada and not a lot of resources, but we really need to deal with the issues here in Utah before we expand anywhere else. We've been asked to come to other countries, and I'm doing some work with a king in Ghana, the development king in Ghana, as a special advisor under my trauma intelligence business, and writing a book about the lessons I've learned on my journey of hope. So yeah, lots of stuff to come.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to continue to follow everything that you're doing. And One Girl Revolution looks forward to staying in touch and supporting anything that you guys have going on and promoting it. And I know that people that are listening, I'm going to encourage them to follow you on social media, sign up for your email list. Like, those are little ways that are free that we can stay informed, not only about the issues at hand, the issues that our world is facing, the issues that we're facing as individuals, but also to stay informed about the great work that you're doing and ways that they can continue to support you. But for people that are listening, how can people support your work? Obviously, they can follow you on social media. I'm sure that they can donate. But what are some other things that people can do? And then also, I want to ask you, what can people do in their own communities to emulate your work? What can they do in their own families and their communities?
Right. Find out about the resources in your community. Start by believing when women and girls and young men and men share with you their stories. Believe them. It takes a lot of courage to share a story of abuse. Start by believing. Always believe the story. And find out where the resources are in your community so that if someone shares a story of abuse with you, you know where the resource is to refer them to. There should be providers in your community that can do lethality assessments and determine the lethality of a situation that someone is fleeing from and get them to a safe space. If they call a domestic violence shelter and they say they're full and they're sorry, that's not good enough. They need to find a provider that's willing to do a lethality assessment on them and find them a safe space. So help them get to the resource that's going to knock down all the doors until they find the next safe space. Help your children become healers and allow them to heal, and talk about interpersonal violence with your children. Talk about good touch, bad touch, and the bathing suit principle. You know, nobody should touch you below the bathing suit area unless they have your consent. Talk about consent with your children. Talk about, with little children, with 2 and 3 year olds, they should know nobody touches you without your permission, including mommy and daddy.
Talking about it is such an important thing. And that's the way that we're going to heal the world, is talking about our own stories, listening to, like you said, listening to other people's stories, but not being afraid to talk about the difficult things and to talk about trauma and healing and our struggles in this world. But I'm sure people can also invite you to speak at their conferences or events. And that's another way that people can spread the message of the great work that you're doing. And again, create a space for people's stories to be heard. But
Beautiful,
I'm just so grateful, Shannon, to have you on the podcast. I'm so honored and just so excited to be connected with you and to continue to follow your great work. But before I let you go, I always end this podcast on one question. So I'd like to ask you, if you could leave women and girls around the world with one message, what would it be?
We are more resilient than we realize. We are made out of the same magical dust that created this universe and that created the most powerful human beings that you love in this universe. And you are as powerful as you believe you are. And you are not your circumstances. You are not your pain. You are not the things that have happened to you. You are bigger. You have been placed on this earth for a reason. And going through whatever you have gone through in this life is going to put you in a space where you can help and heal other people. I challenge you to figure out why you've been through what you've been through, because you are here for a greater purpose. Find out what that purpose is and live in it. Stand in it. Feel the light and love, and expand your arms and help heal this world, because we're all here to love one another and to heal each other. And if we all stand in our purpose and figure out why we're here, we can change this world and we can heal it.
Shannon, you and everyone involved in Journey of Hope are the greatest example of that. I was like sitting here just like, I wanted to stand up and cheer when you were speaking, because it's so important for us to stand in our purpose and heal the world. But Shannon, thank you so much for being on the podcast. And thank you so much for all the incredible work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at One Girl Revo. That's the number one girl REVO. And you can find more information on One Girl Revolution at onegirlrevolution.com. That's the number one girlrevolution.com.